I did not plan to ask for the money at the table. That detail matters because later they would say I ambushed them, that I chose the moment on purpose, that I wanted an audience for my desperation. None of that was true. I had rehearsed the conversation in my head a dozen times, always imagining it happening quietly, somewhere away from the clatter of plates and the sharp eyes of my parents. But Thanksgiving has a way of exposing things you try to keep hidden. By the time I turned onto my sister Lauren's street in Naperville, the sky was already the flat, lifeless gray of late November. The trees were bare, the lawns trimmed into obedience. Her house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac like a picture in a catalog. Brick exterior, white columns, warm yellow light glowing through the windows. It was the kind of home my parents loved to point to when they talked about doing life right. I parked behind my parents' SUV and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. I was 32 years old, divorced, self-employed, and closer to financial collapse than I had ever been willing to admit out loud. None of that showed on my face when I finally stepped out of the car. I rang the bell. Lauren opened the door almost immediately, already smiling too brightly, already holding a glass of wine. She looked exactly as she always did at family gatherings. Perfect hair, effortless makeup, the quiet confidence of someone who had never truly been afraid of falling. "There you are," she said, glancing past me as if expecting someone else. "Happy Thanksgiving." "Happy Thanksgiving," I replied, stepping inside. Her husband Mark nodded at me from the kitchen island, his phone still in his hand. My parents were already seated at the dining table, my mother adjusting napkins, my father scrolling through something on his tablet. "You made it," my mother said. We were starting to wonder. I checked the clock on the wall. I was early. Dinner began the way it always did. Polite conversation that slowly turned into a performance. Mark talked about work. Lauren chimed in with stories about friends' renovations, future plans. My father listened closely, offering praise and advice. My mother smiled and filled glasses. No one asked about me. That wasn't new. I had started my own event logistics company 4 years earlier. At first it had gone well. Then the economy shifted. Clients delayed payments. Venues shut down. One setback became several. I kept my staff paid by draining my savings, telling myself it was temporary. It had been temporary, until it wasn't. I had avoided this conversation for weeks. $50,000 was not a small number. I knew that. But it was the exact amount I needed to keep the business alive long enough to recover. I had run the numbers 100 times. This was not a gamble. It was a bridge. My mother was the one who finally turned to me as dessert was being served. So she said, as if remembering something she had forgotten, "How's work going?" The question landed heavier than it sounded. "It's been difficult," I said carefully. "The past year hasn't been easy." My father let out a short laugh. "That's what happens when you don't choose stability." Lauren looked up, interest flickering across her face. "What kind of difficult?" I hesitated. This was the moment where I could still deflect, where I could smile and say everything was fine, but the truth was already sitting in my chest, pressing upward. "I was hoping to talk to you about something," I said. "I'm short on cash right now, and I was wondering if I could borrow $50,000, just temporarily." The room went silent, not awkward, not surprised, deliberate. My father set his fork down slowly, as if giving himself time to enjoy what came next. $50,000, my mother repeated. "Yes," I said. "I have incoming contracts next quarter. I just need a bridge." Lauren laughed out loud. "You're serious?" she said. "You're asking that here. I wasn't planning to." At Thanksgiving, she continued, shaking her head. "Wow." My father leaned back in his chair. "This is exactly what we warned you about." I felt my face grow warm. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. Lauren smiled, but there was nothing kind in it. "This is what happens when you refuse to listen. You should have stayed in corporate or married better." Mark smirked, not bothering to look up from his phone. My mother sighed loudly. "We can't keep bailing you out." "I'm not asking for a bailout," I said. "I'm asking for a loan." "From your sister," my father said, incredulous. "After all your choices." Lauren set her glass down. "This sounds like irresponsibility. You always chase these little ideas and expect someone else to clean it up." I swallowed. "I helped you when you needed it." "That was different," she snapped. "That was family. This is you not managing your life." The words cut deeper than I expected. "I thought family helped family," I said quietly. My father laughed. "Family doesn't reward bad decisions, especially not in front of everyone." My mother looked away. I realized then that they were not embarrassed for me. They were entertained. I pushed my chair back slowly. I didn't mean to make anyone uncomfortable. "You didn't," my father said. "You made yourself look exactly how you are." I picked up my coat. "Thank you for dinner," I said. No one stopped me. As I stepped back into the cold, the door closing behind me, I heard Lauren say, Some people just never learn. They had no idea what they had just set in motion, and at that moment neither did I. But I would. I sat in my car long after I left Lauren's driveway. The engine was off. The radio was silent. My hands rested in my lap, fingers numb as if my body had not yet caught up to what had just happened. Through the windshield, I could still see the warm glow of my sister's house, the curtains' half-drawn silhouettes moving comfortably inside. They were already back to laughing, to pie, to wine, to pretending I had never been there. I told myself not to cry. That was always my first instinct. Don't cry. Don't give them that. But the tears came anyway, hot and quiet, blurring the streetlights until everything looked like it was underwater. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my coat and took a slow breath. I was not crying because they said no. I was crying because of how they said it, because of the way my father leaned back like a judge passing sentence, because of the way Lauren laughed, not nervously, not awkwardly, but with amusement, because my mother chose silence over me the same way she always had. I drove home on autopilot. My apartment was small but clean, the kind of place you choose when you tell yourself it's temporary. Boxes from old events were stacked neatly along one wall, labeled in black marker. Linens, lighting, audio cables, evidence of a business I had built from nothing with my own hands. I kicked off my boots, dropped my coat on the chair, and stood there in the quiet. The silence was loud. I replayed the dinner in my head, every word sharp and vivid. Lauren's voice, my father's laugh, the way Mark smirked like I was a joke he didn't even have to tell. I realized something then that hurt more than the rejection itself. They weren't surprised I was struggling. They expected it. To them, this was proof. Proof that I was exactly who they had always believed I was. The unstable one. The disappointment. The daughter who didn't follow the script. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Lauren. "You shouldn't have done that at dinner. Dad's really upset." No question mark, no concern, just damage control. I stared at the screen for a long moment before setting the phone face down. An hour passed. Maybe 2. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't eat. I sat on the couch staring at the wall, feeling something shift inside me, something slow and deliberate. Then my laptop chimed. An email notification. I almost ignored it. But the subject line made me sit up. Urgent contract review. It was from a corporate client I had assumed was lost. A regional healthcare group that had gone silent months earlier. I opened the message, my pulse quickening as I read. They wanted to move forward. Not only that they wanted to expand the scope, more locations, more events, more responsibility. I scrolled down to the numbers. My breath caught. It wasn't enough to save me outright. Not yet. But it was enough to change the timeline. Enough to create leverage. Enough to make something else possible. I closed the laptop slowly and leaned back. For the first time all night, I felt something other than humiliation. Clarity. Lauren thought I was reckless. My parents thought I was irresponsible. They all believed my life was a series of poor decisions that finally caught up with me. What none of them asked was how I had survived this long without their help. They never asked how many nights I worked until 2 in the morning, how many contracts I negotiated alone, how many times I covered payroll before paying myself. They never asked because they didn't care. I stood and walked to the window looking out over the parking lot below. A few lights were still on in other apartments. Other people sitting with their own thoughts, their own private reckonings. That was when another memory surfaced. 3 years earlier, Lauren had called me crying. Mark had lost a job opportunity. Credit cards were maxed. She needed help just temporarily. I had transferred money without hesitation. No questions, no audience, no lectures. Family helps family. That phrase echoed now hollow and bitter. I went back to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady again, my breathing even. They thought the story ended with me walking out into the cold. They were wrong. I opened my laptop again, not to email clients, but to review documents I hadn't looked at in a long time. Financials, old transfers, notes I had kept from years of quietly helping my sister when things went wrong behind the scenes. Lauren liked to talk about stability, but stability has receipts. As I scrolled, a pattern began to emerge. Small things at first. Payments I had forgotten about. Transfers labeled temporary that never came back. Credit card charges that weren't mine. My stomach tightened. This wasn't about $50,000 anymore. This was about something much deeper. I closed the laptop and sat back, my mind racing, connections forming. The humiliation at the table had cracked something open, but what spilled out wasn't weakness. It was awareness. I picked up my phone and typed a message to myself, something I would understand later. Stop asking, start looking. I went to bed that night exhausted, but for the first time in months I slept. Not peacefully, purposefully. Because while my family was certain they had put me in my place, I had just realized something they never expected. I wasn't standing at the edge of failure. I was standing at the edge of the truth, and once you see that you can't unsee it. I woke up before my alarm the next morning. The apartment was still dark, the city outside muted and quiet, but my mind was already racing. What I felt wasn't panic, it was focus. The kind that settles in when something finally makes sense. I made coffee and opened my laptop at the small kitchen table that doubled as my desk. The screen glowed softly in the dim light. This was familiar territory. Numbers never lied to me. They didn't judge, didn't interrupt, didn't smirk when you asked for help. They either added up or they didn't. I started with my own records. Transfers I had sent to Lauren over the years. Notes I had written to myself. Temporary help. Short-term loan. Just until next month. I remembered each moment clearly. The tears in her voice. The promises to pay me back once things settled. They never did. At the time, I told myself it didn't matter. I was helping my sister. I was being generous. I could afford it back then. But generosity has a way of blinding you. I pulled up my bank statements from the past 3 years. The amounts were small enough individually that they never raised alarms. A few thousand here, a few thousand there. But as I copied them into a spreadsheet, my chest tightened. The total climbed faster than I expected. Not 50,000. More. Much more. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment, pressing my fingers against my temple. This wasn't theft. Not exactly. I had given the money willingly, or at least I thought I had. The real question was why. Why had Lauren needed so much help if her life was as perfect as she made it look? I opened another folder. Old emails, text messages, anything that mentioned money. Patterns began to form. Her requests always came after something big. A renovation, a vacation, a new car lease. Never framed as want, always framed as need. I checked public records next. Property filings, business registrations, nothing illegal. But something felt off. Lauren and Mark lived comfortably, but their reported income didn't fully explain the lifestyle. I felt a flicker of anger, then sharp and unwelcome. Not because they had money problems, but because of the hypocrisy. They sat across from me at Thanksgiving, judging my choices, calling me irresponsible, while quietly leaning on me to prop up their image. They didn't just say no to my request, they humiliated me for it. I thought of my father's laugh, Lauren's smile. My phone buzzed. Another message from Lauren. Mom says you should apologize. You made things awkward. I stared at the words, then set the phone aside without responding. For the first time, I wasn't tempted to explain myself. I went back to the spreadsheet. As I worked, another memory surfaced. A conversation from years ago, barely remembered until now. Lauren had mentioned something about Mark helping with finances for a family business. Consulting, she had said. I hadn't thought much of it then. Now I searched Mark's name. What I found made my stomach drop. Mark wasn't just an employee somewhere. He was listed as a consultant for a mid-sized logistics firm based 2 states over. A firm that specialized in event coordination and supply chain management. My field. I clicked deeper. The firm's clients overlapped suspiciously with mine. Not directly competing, but adjacent. Shared vendors, shared venues. I felt a chill run through me. This wasn't coincidence. I pulled up my contract history. A handful of deals that had fallen through at the last minute, clients who had gone quiet without explanation. At the time, I blamed the market, the economy, bad luck. Now I wondered if something else had been happening behind my back. I wasn't ready to accuse anyone yet. Accusations without proof were just noise. But questions were forming, and once they formed, they refused to go away. Around noon, I closed my laptop and went for a walk. The cold air bit at my face, clearing my head. Leaves crunched under my boots. I needed distance from the screen, from the numbers, from the growing knot in my chest. Family helps family. That phrase echoed again, but now it sounded different. What if I had been helping them stay afloat while they quietly undermined me? The thought made my stomach turn. I stopped at a bench and sat down, hands folded, breathing slowly. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was understanding. And understanding came first. Back at home, I called my accountant. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding distracted. "Happy late Thanksgiving," he said. "Can I ask you something?" I replied. "Off the record." He paused. "That usually means yes. I want to review all outgoing transfers connected to my business over the past 3 years. Everything. Vendors, consultants, personal overlaps." There was a beat of silence. "That's a big request." "I know. Is something wrong?" "I don't know yet," I said honestly. but I think something's been hiding in plain sight." He agreed to help, his tone shifting from casual to professional. After I hung up, I sat there staring at the wall again, but this time the silence felt different. It wasn't heavy. It was expectant. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. "You really hurt your father," the message read. "You embarrassed us." I typed back slowly, deliberately. "I asked for help. You chose to humiliate me." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. No reply. That told me everything I needed to know. I closed my phone and returned to my laptop, opening a new document. I titled it simply, "Thanksgiving." I began writing down everything that had been said. Who spoke, who laughed, who stayed silent. Not for drama, for memory, for clarity. Because stories change over time. Facts do not. By the time evening came, I had pages of notes, spreadsheets open across my screen, and a quiet certainty settling into my bones. I had walked into my sister's house believing I was the one asking for too much. I was wrong. I wasn't asking for too much. I was asking the wrong people. And if the numbers told me what I suspected they would, then the humiliation I felt at that table would turn into something else entirely. Not anger, not revenge, control. The call from my accountant came 3 days later. I was in the middle of a site walkthrough for a small, nonprofit gala, clipboard in hand, pretending everything in my life was normal. Folding chairs, power outlets, delivery schedules. The familiar mechanics of work grounded me in a way nothing else could. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew who it was before I answered. "Can you step somewhere private?" he asked instead of greeting me. That was all I needed to hear. I walked into the empty hallway behind the ballroom and closed the door. The muffled echo of voices faded. "Okay," I said, "talk to me." There was a pause on the line. Papers shuffled. I could hear his breath slow and measured, like a man choosing his words carefully. "You were right to ask," he said. "Something's wrong." My grip tightened on the phone. How wrong? Wrong enough that I wish you hadn't been related to the people involved. That sentence landed hard. "Start from the beginning," I said. He explained that when he began tracing outgoing payments tied to my company, everything looked normal at first. Vendors, rentals, freelancers, standard expenses. But when he widened, the scope, patterns emerged. Recurring payments routed through intermediary accounts. Consulting fees that didn't match deliverables. Charges categorized vaguely enough to avoid scrutiny. Then he said my sister's husband's name. "Mark," he continued, "has been listed as a subcontracted consultant through a third-party entity. Not directly, indirectly." My stomach dropped. "How much?" I asked. Another pause. "Over the past 3 years," he said, "just under $180,000. The hallway seemed to tilt. "That's not possible," I said automatically. "It is," he replied, "and it's documented." I leaned against the wall, the clipboard slipping from my hand to the floor. "He wasn't stealing," I said, more to myself than to him. "He didn't have access like that." "He didn't need direct access," my accountant said. "He positioned himself between you and certain vendors, redirected fees, inflated costs, and in at least 2 cases billed for services that were never provided." The humiliation from Thanksgiving flashed back through me sharper now. Lauren's laugh, Mark's smirk, my father's judgment. They knew. Not all of it, maybe, but enough. "I need copies of everything I said." "I already prepared them," he replied, "and there's more." I closed my eyes. "Several contracts you lost," he continued. "They didn't fall through because of the market. They went to a competitor Mark has a financial relationship with." The silence stretched. "This wasn't just money," I said slowly. "This was sabotage." "Yes," he said simply. I thanked him and ended the call. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door, my reflection faint in the polished surface. The woman looking back at me didn't look shocked. She looked awake. That night I didn't cry. I spread the documents across my kitchen table, reading every line, every timestamp, every signature. The story unfolded clearly now. While I was draining my savings to keep my company afloat, Mark had been siphoning money out through polite invoices and friendly phone calls. And Lauren had benefited. New furniture, new vacations, renovations that never quite matched their income. They didn't just refuse to lend me $50,000. They had already taken more than 3 times that amount. I thought of my mother telling me we couldn't keep bailing you out. The irony made my chest ache. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my father. "We need to talk," the message read. I stared at it for a long time. For once I didn't respond. The next morning I met with a lawyer. Not a family friend, not someone my parents knew. A woman recommended by another business owner who had survived something similar. She listened without interrupting as I laid everything out. The Thanksgiving dinner, the request, the humiliation, the numbers. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. "You have a case," she said. Against Mark, I replied. And possibly against your sister, she added carefully, depending on what she knew. I nodded. I don't want revenge, I said. I want the truth on record. She studied me for a moment. Sometimes those look the same from the outside. I left her office with a folder under my arm and something else in my chest. Resolve. That evening, Lauren called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. What do you want? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. You've been ignoring us, she said. Dad's worried. I'm busy, I replied. There was a pause. Look, she said softer now. If this is about the money, we can talk. But you really shouldn't have put us on the spot like that. I laughed quietly. Lauren, how much do you think Mark has been paid by my company? Silence. Lauren, that's not fair, she said quickly. You don't understand how business works. I understand perfectly, I replied. That's the problem. Her voice sharpened. You're imagining things. You always do this. You twist situations to make yourself the victim. I closed my eyes. Tell Mark I said that my lawyer will be in touch. She inhaled sharply. You wouldn't. I already did. The call ended abruptly. I set the phone down and exhaled slowly. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted. They weren't judging me anymore. They were afraid. And that was the moment I understood something essential. Asking for $50,000 hadn't made me weak. It had exposed the truth, and once the truth was exposed, everything else would follow. The invitation came 2 days later. Not a request, not an apology, a summons. My mother left a voicemail, her voice tight and controlled the way it always was when she wanted something without admitting it. We need to sit down as a family, she said. This has gone far enough. Come over tomorrow evening. Your father expects you. She didn't ask if I was available. She didn't ask how I was doing. She didn't mention Thanksgiving or the money or the accusation I had made. Just authority wrapped in concern. I didn't respond right away. I let the message sit. I listened to it again later that night, then again the next morning, paying attention not just to what she said, but to what she didn't. There was no denial, no outrage on Mark's behalf, no insistence that I was wrong, only urgency. That told me everything. I agreed to meet them, but not at my parents' house. I suggested a neutral location. A restaurant halfway between us. Public, quiet, somewhere no one could raise their voice without being noticed. My father didn't like that. We're not airing private matters in public, he texted. This stopped being private when you humiliated me in front of everyone, I replied. If you want to talk, that's where I'll be. There was a long pause before he agreed. The restaurant was nearly empty when I arrived. Early dinner crowd, soft lighting, neutral colors, the kind of place people chose when they wanted to feel civilized. My parents were already seated when I walked in. My mother stood as soon as she saw me, her face pinched with performative concern. My father remained seated, arms crossed, jaw tight. Lauren and Mark arrived last. Lauren looked polished as always, but her eyes were red, the skin around them tight. Mark avoided my gaze entirely. We ordered drinks. No one touched them. My father cleared his throat. The situation has gotten out of hand, he said. Threatening lawyers, accusing family of crimes. That's not how we handle things. I didn't threaten, I replied calmly. I stated facts. Lauren scoffed. You think numbers on a spreadsheet make you right? They make me informed, I said. Mark shifted in his seat. My mother shot him a warning look. You've always had a flair for drama, my father continued. You take something small and blow it up until it hurts everyone. I looked at him, really looked at him. $180,000, I said evenly. Over 3 years. That's not small. The table went silent. Lauren laughed weakly. You're exaggerating. I'm not, I said, and you know it. My mother reached across the table, touching my hand. Honey, if you needed help, you could have just asked. I pulled my hand back. I did ask, I said, at Thanksgiving, and you laughed at me. That was different, she insisted. You embarrassed us. My voice stayed steady. You embarrassed me. Mark finally spoke, his voice low. This isn't what it looks like. Then explain it, I said, turning to him. Explain why my accountant traced payments from my company through a shell vendor to an account you control. He swallowed. Those were consulting fees. For what work, I asked. He hesitated. Lauren jumped in. Mark helps with strategy, networking. You don't see everything he does. I see invoices, I said. I see timestamps. I see duplicate charges. I see contracts redirected to a competitor you have a financial relationship with. My father slammed his hand on the table. Enough! A few heads turned from nearby tables. This is not a courtroom, he snapped. You're not a prosecutor. You're a daughter who's forgotten her place. There it was. The familiar phrase, the invisible line I was never supposed to cross. I know my place, I said quietly. I'm the one who paid your property taxes last year. My mother gasped. Lauren froze. My father stared at me, stunned. What did you say, he asked? You heard me, I replied, just like I paid for Lauren's kitchen renovation, and the family vacation 2 summers ago, and Mark's so-called consulting income. Mark's face went pale. This is absurd, my mother whispered. It's documented, I said, every transfer, every receipt. Lauren's composure cracked. You had no right to dig into our finances. I had every right, I said. It was my money. My father stood abruptly. You ungrateful child. I didn't flinch. For years I continued, you treated me like the unstable one, the disappointment, the one who couldn't get it together, while quietly benefiting from my work. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We did what families do. No, I said, you did what users do. The word hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Mark pushed his chair back slightly, voice shaking. We can fix this. I can pay it back. I looked at him. With what money? Silence. Lauren's voice rose. You're destroying this family. I shook my head. I didn't destroy anything. I exposed it. The waiter approached cautiously. Is everything okay? Yes, I said. We're done. I stood placing cash on the table for my untouched drink. My father pointed at me, his hand trembling. If you walk away from this, don't expect us to forgive you. I met his gaze. I'm not asking for forgiveness. As I turned to leave, my mother called after me. What do you want? I paused. I want my company protected, I said, and I want you to understand something. They all watched me now. You didn't raise a failure, I said. You raised someone you underestimated. I walked out into the evening air, my heart pounding, but my steps steady. Behind me, I heard Lauren start to cry. Ahead of me, for the first time in weeks, the future felt clear. The day after the family meeting, my phone stayed quiet. No calls from my mother, no texts from Lauren, no defensive messages from Mark trying to explain himself. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was strategic. I knew that much. My family had never been good at accountability, but they were excellent at regrouping. Silence meant they were planning. I spent that morning at my office, a small rented space above a print shop, sunlight slanting through the blinds. My team didn't know what was happening. To them, I was the same calm, focused owner I had always been. I signed checks, approved invoices, reviewed timelines. But under the surface, everything was shifting. At noon, my lawyer called. They retained counsel, she said without preamble. Who I asked, though, I already knew. Your sister and her husband, joint representation. I exhaled slowly. That didn't take long. No, she agreed, and it tells me something important. What's that? They're not denying the transfers. They're reframing them. I leaned back in my chair. How? They're claiming the payments were verbal agreements, compensation for services rendered, and they're suggesting you approved them informally. I laughed, sharp and humorless. Of course they are. That's why documentation matters, she said. And you have plenty. After we hung up, I sat there staring at my desk, thinking about how easily they slid into defense mode. Not remorse, not accountability, defense. It struck me then that this wasn't about money to them. It was about exposure. That afternoon, my mother finally called. I let it ring twice before answering. We didn't sleep, she said immediately. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied, and I meant it. But sympathy didn't erase truth. This has gone too far, she continued. Mark's a good man. He would never intentionally hurt you. I closed my eyes. Mom, I said quietly, he hurt me whether he intended to or not. You're letting bitterness cloud your judgment, she insisted. Families handle things privately. Families don't steal from each other, I said. There was a pause. You're not thinking clearly. I realized then that she wasn't calling to understand. She was calling to manage the fallout. Did you know, I asked? Silence. Mom, I repeated. Did you know they were using my money? I didn't know the details, she said carefully. But I knew you helped them sometimes. You've always been generous. That word again. Generous, the euphemism they used instead of exploited. I trusted you, I said. And we trusted you wouldn't do this, she shot back. Dragging lawyers into it, threatening your sister. I felt something settle in my chest, not anger, finality. I'm not threatening anyone, I said. I'm protecting what I built. She sighed heavily. Your father thinks you're doing this to punish us. I'm doing this because I have no choice, I replied. Because if I don't draw a line now, this never ends. She didn't respond. I love you, she said finally, but I can't support this. I know, I replied. We hung up, and for the first time, I felt the weight of what separation really meant. Not distance, not silence, but choosing yourself when no one else will. 2 days later, the letter arrived. Certified mail. Thick envelope. Lauren's handwriting on the return address. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the counter and went about my evening cooking dinner, cleaning up, letting my nerves settle. When I finally tore it open, my hands were steady. Inside was a formal demand letter. They wanted mediation. They wanted to resolve things quietly. They wanted me to waive claims in exchange for partial repayment over time. Partial. No apology, no admission of wrongdoing, just negotiation. They still thought this was a misunderstanding. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer with a single line. Proceed. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind kept replaying moments from the past, reframed by what I now knew. The casual comments, the entitlement, the way Lauren always assumed I would help, and the way my parents treated that help as invisible. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. The next morning, I received an email from one of my former clients, a client who had abruptly canceled a contract the year before. They wanted to talk. We met for coffee that afternoon. He looked uncomfortable, apologetic. I owe you an explanation, he said. I was advised to go another direction. Someone close to you suggested your company was unstable. My jaw tightened. Who? He hesitated, then said Mark's name. That was the final piece. I left the cafe knowing exactly what needed to happen next. This wasn't just about recovering money. This was about reclaiming my reputation. I authorized my lawyer to move forward fully. No mediation, no quiet resolution, formal action, disclosure, paper trails laid bare. If they wanted to drag my name through doubt, I would drag the truth into daylight. That evening, Lauren texted me, "You're really going to do this?" I stared at the message for a long moment. "Yes," I typed back, "I am." Her reply came instantly. "You're heartless." I set the phone down. Heartless was what they called you when you stopped bleeding for them. As I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not relief. Strength. Because the masks were finally off. And once that happens, there's no pretending anymore. Once lawyers get involved, things move faster than people expect. Within a week, subpoenas were issued. Bank records requested. Vendor contracts pulled. What my family had hoped to keep quiet began to develop a paper trail of its own, one that didn't care about reputations or holiday dinners. The first call came from Mark. He hadn't tried to reach me directly since the restaurant meeting. Now his name flashed on my phone like a warning. I let it ring. He called again, then again, finally a voicemail. "Please," his voice cracked. "This has gone too far. You don't understand what this could do to us." Us! I deleted the message without responding. The next call came from Lauren that night. Her tone was different now. No accusation, no superiority, just panic. "They're asking questions," she said the moment I answered. "The bank, the vendors, people are calling Mark at work." "I know," I replied. "You could stop this," she insisted. "You could tell them it was a misunderstanding." I leaned back on my couch, staring at the ceiling. It wasn't. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing. "You always do this," she said finally. "You always make yourself the victim." "No," I said quietly. "I make myself visible." She hung up. 2 days later, the first consequence landed. Mark was placed on administrative leave. Not fired, not yet, but suspended pending investigation. His employer had received inquiries they couldn't ignore. Questions about conflicts of interest, undisclosed income, ethical violations. Lauren showed up at my apartment unannounced that evening. I almost didn't open the door. When I did, I barely recognized her. Her hair was pulled back hastily. No makeup, no confidence. She looked smaller, like the weight of reality had finally pressed down on her. "This is your fault," she said as soon as she stepped inside. I closed the door behind her. "Sit down or leave." She sat. "He's going to lose his job," she said. "Do you understand that?" "Yes," I replied. "I do." Her voice rose. "Then why won't you stop?" Because stopping now would mean pretending none of this mattered. Because stopping now would mean agreeing that my work, my money, my reputation were disposable. Because I said he made choices. She laughed bitterly. "And you didn't." I met her gaze, every single one. She looked around my apartment as if seeing it for the first time. The simple furniture, the stacks of folders on the table, the evidence of a life built deliberately not decorated. "You think you're better than us," she said. "No," I said. "I think I'm done being beneath you." Her eyes filled with tears. "We're going to lose everything." I felt a flicker of something then, not guilt, recognition. "This is what I felt at Thanksgiving," I said. "When you laughed, when Dad judged me, when Mom stayed silent." She shook her head. "That was different." "It wasn't," I replied. "You just weren't the one on the floor." She stood abruptly. "If you go through with this, you won't have a family left." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have one when I needed it. She left without another word. The following week, my name appeared in places it never had before. Not headlines, not gossip columns, industry conversations. A former client reached out to apologize for believing rumors. Another asked if I was available for a new contract. A vendor quietly reinstated terms they had withdrawn months earlier. The truth was doing its work. At the same time, the family narrative began to crack. My father stopped calling mutual relatives. My mother stopped attending her usual luncheons. Lauren deactivated her social media accounts. Mark's professional profile vanished overnight. People noticed. Questions followed. I heard through a cousin that my parents were telling anyone who would listen that I had turned on them, that success had changed me, that money had made me cold. I let them talk. I was too busy rebuilding. The contract from the healthcare group finalized that Friday. Then another. Then another. The pipeline I thought I had lost forever reopened stronger than before, not because I begged, because the lies had been exposed. One evening as I was leaving my office, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "This is the ethics committee," the voice said when I answered. "We'd like to ask you a few questions." I smiled. "Of course," I said. "I've been waiting." By the time I hung up, the final shape of what was coming had become clear. This wasn't just a family reckoning. It was a public one. And for the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt something close to peace. Because the truth no longer needed my protection. It could stand on its own. The ethics committee meeting happened on a Tuesday morning. Gray skies, cold rain, the kind of day where the world feels stripped down to essentials. I took that as a good sign. I didn't need warmth or comfort. I needed clarity. The conference room was smaller than I expected. No drama, no long table, just 3 people, a recorder, and a stack of documents that looked disturbingly familiar. They already knew. That became clear within the first 10 minutes. They didn't ask whether Mark had been involved. They asked how long I had been aware of it. They didn't question whether the funds existed. They asked whether I had authorized the structure he used. "No," I said calmly, "I did not." They nodded, made notes, and moved on. I answered everything honestly. Dates, emails, conversations. I didn't embellish. I didn't soften anything. I didn't try to sound generous or forgiving. I simply told the truth the way it happened without apology. By the time the meeting ended, I knew something irreversible had begun. That afternoon, Mark was formally terminated. Not quietly, not gently. For cause. Conflict of interest. Financial misconduct. Breach of ethical standards. Lauren called me within an hour. This time she was screaming. "You ruined him," she shouted. "You destroyed our lives." I held the phone away from my ear, waiting for her to finish. When she finally ran out of breath, I spoke. "No," I said. I stopped lying for him. "You could have handled this privately," she sobbed. "You didn't have to go this far." I closed my eyes. "You already tried private," I replied. "You just didn't expect consequences." She hung up on me. That evening, my mother showed up at my door. She looked older than I remembered, smaller, like the world had finally stopped bending to accommodate her comfort. "I don't understand you anymore," she said after I let her in. "You used to be kind." I gestured toward the chair. She didn't sit. "I am kind," I replied, "just not compliant." She shook her head. "Families forgive. Families protect," I said, "and you didn't." Her eyes filled with tears. "You're punishing all of us for one mistake." "One mistake," I asked, "or years of choosing silence?" She didn't answer. "I asked for $50,000, I continued. "You laughed at me. You shamed me. You didn't ask why. You didn't ask what happened. You decided I deserved it." Her shoulders sagged. "We were scared." "So was I said. "I just didn't get to be cruel about it." She left shortly after, quieter than when she arrived. The fallout accelerated. Within days, a formal audit expanded beyond Mark's actions. Vendors cooperated quickly once legal language entered the conversation. Accounts were frozen, transfers reversed where possible, statements corrected. Lauren tried to intervene. She called my lawyer. She emailed me. She reached out to relatives trying to rally support. But something unexpected happened. People stopped taking her side. Not because they liked me more. Because the story no longer made sense. Why would the irresponsible sister be the one with clean records? Why would the stable couple be drowning in unanswered questions? The narrative cracked. And once it cracked, it shattered fast. Mark moved out. I heard it through a cousin who couldn't stop talking about it. He left early one morning, suitcases loaded into his car, no goodbye. Lauren told people it was temporary. Stress-related. But stress doesn't take half the furniture with it. A week later, Lauren called again. Her voice was hollow this time. "He's not coming back," she said. I said nothing. "He says this is my fault," she continued. "That if I hadn't pushed him to keep up appearances, he wouldn't have needed the money." I let out a slow breath. "He needed the money because he wanted it," I said. "Not because of you, and not because of me." She sniffed. "I don't know who I am without him." I didn't say what came to mind. Instead, I said, "That's something only you can figure out." After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, not triumphant, not relieved, just grounded. Because this wasn't revenge anymore. It was resolution. My business stabilized faster than I expected. Once the rumors were replaced by facts, trust returned. Contracts finalized. Deposits cleared. For the first time in over a year, I paid myself a full salary without guilt. I didn't celebrate. I took a breath. That Friday, my lawyer called with an update. They're offering a settlement, she said, for what I asked, to avoid court. Mark wants to repay part of the funds in exchange for confidentiality. I laughed softly. No. She smiled through the phone. I could hear it. I thought you'd say that. I don't need secrecy, I said. I need closure. She understood. The following Sunday, my parents didn't attend church. That detail came to me secondhand from an aunt who sounded confused and slightly alarmed. My father, who had never missed a service, stayed home. Shame does that to people. It removes their audience. I spent that Sunday morning alone walking through a park near my apartment. Bare trees, cold air, clean ground. I realized then that the humiliation at Thanksgiving had been the last time I ever begged for belonging. Everything after that had been reclamation. And the final piece was still coming. Because when people lose control, they reveal the truth they were hiding from themselves. And Lauren wasn't done unraveling yet. The call came on a Thursday morning just after 9. I was reviewing a proposal when my phone lit up with my father's name. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. We hadn't spoken since the restaurant, not a word. But something told me this wasn't a guilt call or an accusation. It was something else, I answered. We need to talk, he said. No greeting, no anger, just exhaustion. About what I asked. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing, slower than usual. Your mother collapsed yesterday, he said. My chest tightened. Is she okay? She's stable, he replied. Stress-related. The doctor says it's not serious, but things are changing. I waited. We're updating the will, he said. The words landed heavier than I expected. I don't see how that concerns me, I replied carefully. It does, he said, because your sister is demanding changes, and because your mother insists we speak to you first. I closed my eyes. Why now, I asked. Because he said quietly, everything we thought was settled isn't anymore. He wanted to meet. Not at their house, not in public, at a lawyer's office downtown. Neutral territory again. Controlled, quiet. I agreed. The office smelled like old books and furniture polish. My parents sat side by side, not touching. My mother looked fragile. My father looked smaller. The lawyer greeted me politely, motioning for us to sit. Lauren wasn't there. That was the first sign. We've been revisiting our estate plan, the lawyer began. Given recent developments, your parents want clarity. My father cleared his throat. Your sister believes she's being punished, he said. She thinks you've turned us against her. I didn't, I replied. I stopped protecting lies. My mother reached for a tissue. She's scared, she said. She's facing consequences for the first time in her life. I didn't respond. The lawyer slid a document across the table. This is the current will, he said. Equal distribution. Assets divided evenly. I glanced at it without touching it, and I asked. My father exhaled. We're reconsidering. That word again. Reconsidering. For years, he continued, we believed stability came from appearances, from predictability, from doing what was expected. He looked at me then, really looked at me. You didn't do that, he said, and we punished you for it. My mother nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. We were wrong. I sat very still. This isn't an apology, I said quietly. No, my father admitted. It's an acknowledgement. The lawyer spoke again. Your parents want to revise the will to reflect contributions made during their lifetime. I understood immediately. You mean the money, I said. Yes, the lawyer confirmed. Significant financial support provided by you to your sister and parents. Lauren's name hung in the air like smoke. My father rubbed his hands together. We can't pretend it didn't happen. We can't pretend you didn't carry us. I swallowed. What are you proposing, I asked. The lawyer slid another document forward. Adjusted distributions, trust conditions, clauses tied to repayment and accountability. Lauren's inheritance would be reduced unless funds were returned. My parents' property would be partially placed in a trust overseen by a third party. And my name appeared where it never had before, not as an afterthought. As executor. I looked up slowly. You want me to manage this, I said. We want you to protect it, my mother whispered, from chaos. I thought of Thanksgiving, the laughter, the judgment, the way they had looked at me like I was asking for too much. Now they were asking me to clean up the wreckage. I'll consider it, I said. My father nodded. That's all we're asking. As I stood to leave, my mother reached for my arm. Lauren doesn't know yet. I figured, I replied. She won't take this well. I know. Outside, the air felt colder than before. That night, Lauren called. She was crying before I even said hello. They're cutting me out, she sobbed. They're choosing you. They're choosing accountability, I said. You planned this, she accused. You waited until everything fell apart. No, I replied. You did. She screamed. She begged. She threatened. She accused me of betrayal, of manipulation, of destroying her future. I listened. Then I said one thing. I asked for $50,000, I said. You laughed at me. Everything after that was consequence. She hung up. I sat in the dark phone in my hand, heart steady. The will wasn't revenge. It was recognition. And recognition changes everything. The envelope arrived 3 days later. No return address, thick, heavy, legal. I recognized the firm name before I even opened it. The same attorney who had overseen the will revisions, which meant this wasn't a courtesy copy, this was a trigger. Inside was a formal notice, a financial reconciliation request. Not from me, from the trust. My parents had authorized a full audit of all monetary transfers made within the family over the past 10 years. Loans, gifts, tuition, payments, emergency funds, temporary help. Everything that had ever been brushed off as family support. Everything Lauren had treated like oxygen. The trust required documentation, receipts, proof of repayment, signed agreements. Lauren had none of that. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, the letters spread open like a quiet accusation. This wasn't something I had demanded. I hadn't even suggested it. But I knew exactly why it was happening. My parents weren't just rewriting their will. They were trying to understand how they'd lost control of their own lives, and Lauren was about to become the case study. That afternoon, my father called again. She came by screaming, he said. I didn't ask who. She accused us of setting her up, he continued. She said you poisoned us against her. And I asked her for records, he said. Just basic ones, dates, amounts, anything. I could hear the shame in his voice. She couldn't provide a single thing. I closed my eyes. How much I asked. There was a pause, then a number that made my stomach drop. Over $300,000, he said quietly. Over the years. I exhaled slowly. Not because of the amount, because I knew it was real. That doesn't include the money you sent directly, he added. Only what passed through us. Of course it didn't. Lauren had always been smart enough to diversify her dependents. What happens now, I asked. The trust freezes distributions, he said, until reconciliation. She's going to come for me, I said. I know, he replied. I'm sorry. That night she did. Lauren showed up at my door just before 10. No warning, no call. I opened it and saw a version of her I barely recognized. No makeup, hair pulled back too tight, eyes sharp with panic. You did this, she said. I didn't, I replied calmly. You knew, she snapped. You knew this would happen. I knew accountability would come eventually, I said. I didn't choose the timing. She pushed past me into my apartment like she still belonged there. I need help, she said, pacing. They're treating me like a criminal. They're asking for records, I replied. That's not criminal. That's adult. She turned on me. You always wanted this. You always wanted to be the good one. I didn't answer. She stopped pacing, looked at me closely. You're not going to help me, she said slowly. No, I said, I'm not. Her face hardened. You owe me, she said. I laughed then. Not loudly, not cruelly, just enough to end the conversation. I paid your rent when you couldn't, I said. I covered your tuition when you quit again. I wired money at midnight because you said it was an emergency. She opened her mouth. I owe you nothing, I continued, and you owe everyone. She stared at me like I'd slapped her. If you don't help me, she said, voice low, I'll tell them things about you. I tilted my head, like what? She hesitated. There it was. She had nothing. Leave, I said. She didn't move. Lauren, I said again, get out. She finally did, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I locked it, leaned against it, let the silence settle. The next week was chaos. Lauren hired a lawyer. A bad one, cheap, loud, aggressive. Letters started arriving. Threats, accusations, claims of undue influence. None of it stuck. The audit continued. Bank statements, old transfers, patterns emerging like bruises under fluorescent light. Every crisis Lauren had ever had suddenly had a price tag. And every solution had come from someone else. My parents started therapy. That shocked me more than the will. They didn't tell Lauren. They didn't tell anyone. But my mother mentioned it during a call, voice tentative. We're trying to understand why we enabled, she said, why we chose comfort over truth. I listened. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to fix them. At work, things shifted too. Word travels, not specifics, just tone. People started treating me differently, with respect, with caution. I had always been competent. Now I was untouchable. One afternoon, my assistant brought me coffee and said quietly, Your sister called. I didn't ask what she wanted. She said it was urgent. Did you take a message, I asked. No, she said. I told her all communication had to be in writing. I smiled. Lauren was unraveling, not because of me, because she had never learned how to stand without leaning. 2 weeks later, the trust issued a preliminary finding. Misuse of funds, breach of good faith, recommendation for reduced distribution. Lauren lost access to everything overnight. Cards declined, accounts frozen, support gone. She left me a voicemail, crying, not dramatic, real. I don't know who I am without them, she said. I listened to it once, then deleted it. Because knowing who you are is not someone else's job. By the end of the month, the will revisions were finalized. So was something else. My parents transferred executor authority fully. To me, not because I demanded it, because they finally understood who had been managing reality all along. Chapter 10 ended not with victory, but with exposure. And exposure is always the beginning of the end. The court date wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no gasps, no last-minute confessions. Just fluorescent lights, stiff chairs, and the quiet hum of consequence settling into place. Lauren sat across the aisle from me, shoulders tense, jaw clenched. She wore a blazer I recognized. I had bought it for her 3 years earlier when she said she needed to look credible for a job interview she never showed up to. She didn't look at me. Her lawyer leaned in too close, whispering frantically. Papers shuffled, pens tapped. He looked nervous. Not for her, for himself. Because by then the narrative had changed. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Everyone sat. The trust's attorney presented first. Calm, methodical, clean. 10 years of financial records. Patterns. Amounts. Dates. No emotion. Just facts. Lauren's lawyer tried to interrupt twice. Both times the judge shut him down. This is not a trial of feelings, the judge said flatly. This is a review of conduct. I watched my sister's hands tremble in her lap. When it was her turn to speak, she stood too fast. I was supported by my family, she said. That's what families do. The judge nodded. Yes. And families also document loans. Lauren swallowed. They never asked. That does not absolve misuse, the judge replied. Then the question came. Ms. Reynolds, the judge said, using Lauren's married name she still clung to, can you identify any instance in which you attempted repayment? Silence. I didn't think I had to, she finally whispered. That was it. That was the sentence. The court ruled in favor of the trust. Funds misappropriated. Distributions reduced. Mandatory repayment schedule implemented. No jail time, no public scandal. Just something far worse for someone like Lauren. Limitations. Afterward, she waited until the hallway emptied. Then she approached me. You didn't have to be there, she said quietly. Yes, I replied. I did. She looked at me for the first time in months. Her eyes weren't angry anymore. They were hollow. They love you now, she said. They respect me, I corrected. There's a difference. She scoffed weakly. Same thing. No, I said. Love without respect is just control. She nodded once like she understood. Then she asked the question I had been expecting. What happens to me now? I didn't answer right away. Now I said, finally, you live within what you earn. She flinched. You always hated me, she said. I shook my head. No, I hated what you were allowed to become. She turned away without another word. I didn't follow. That night, my parents invited me to dinner. Just me. No pretense, no forced warmth. My mother cooked, my father set the table. Small gestures, earnest. We don't expect forgiveness, my father said as we sat down. We know we broke something. I'm not here to fix the past, I replied. I'm here to protect the future. My mother nodded. We see that now. There was a pause. Then my father reached into a folder. We want to make something clear, he said. Inside was an amended letter of intent. Not legal language. Personal. It outlined expectations, boundaries, accountability. No more bailouts. No more silence. No more favoritism disguised as love. They had signed it. Voluntarily. I don't need this, I said honestly. We do, my mother replied. That was the moment I knew something had shifted. Not because they chose me, but because they chose truth. Weeks passed. Lauren moved out of her condo, sold furniture, took a job she hated. The world didn't end. It just stopped cushioning her. At work, I was offered a promotion. Not because of optics, because I had earned it years ago. I accepted without hesitation. The night before my official announcement, I sat alone on my balcony, city lights blinking below. I thought about Thanksgiving, about the table, about the laughter that wasn't kind, about the $50,000 that had exposed everything. I had asked for help. They had given me humiliation, and somehow that had saved me. My phone buzzed. A text from Lauren. Just one line. I'm starting over. I don't know how to do this, but I'm trying. I stared at the screen. Then I typed back. That's the first honest thing you've ever done. I didn't add anything else. I didn't need to. Because Chapter 11 wasn't about revenge. It was about watching the lie collapse and realizing I no longer lived inside it. The first Thanksgiving after everything happened was quiet. No long table, no matching napkins, no forced laughter or competitive gratitude. Just me. I cooked anyway. Not because I had to, because I wanted to reclaim the day, because I refused to let a holiday remain poisoned by one memory of humiliation. I roasted a small turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans with too much garlic, the kind of meal you make when no one is judging the presentation. When I sat down to eat, I realized something that startled me. I wasn't sad. I had expected grief. some hollow ache, a sense of loss that would creep in once the noise stopped. Instead, there was relief. Deep, settled, honest. The phone didn't ring. No last-minute guilt calls. No dramatic apologies. No emergencies that were actually manipulations in disguise. My parents had respected the boundary. Lauren hadn't reached out again. And for the first time, silence felt like peace instead of abandonment. A week later, my father asked to meet. Just coffee, no lawyers, no documents. I agreed. He looked older. Not physically exactly, more like someone who had stopped pretending. I won't ask you to come back into the family the way it was, he said, because I know that version doesn't exist anymore. I nodded. But I want you to know, he continued, that when you stood up that night, it forced us to see ourselves clearly. I stirred my coffee slowly. That wasn't my goal, I said. I know, he replied. That's what makes it worse. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for help. He just said thank you. That mattered more than any apology he could have offered. Lauren sent one last message before the year ended. No accusations, no self-pity. Just a photo. A small apartment, a secondhand couch, a stack of moving boxes. Caption still standing. I stared at it for a long time. Then I put my phone down. I didn't reply. Not because I was cruel. Because some journeys need to be walked without witnesses. Work changed after that. Not overnight, not magically. But I noticed something subtle. People stopped questioning my decisions. Stopped explaining things to me slowly. Stopped assuming I needed permission. The confidence I carried wasn't loud. It was unmovable. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. The $50,000 I had asked for that night never came. I never asked again. Because the truth was I didn't need it. What I needed was the moment they said no. I needed the laughter, the dismissal, the public humiliation. I needed to see the system clearly. Some people think revenge is about destruction. It isn't. It's about detachment. It's about stepping back far enough to see who benefits from your silence, and then choosing not to provide it anymore. By spring, my life was unrecognizable. Not because it was flashy, because it was intentional. I spent money differently. I spent time differently. I stopped shrinking my success to make others comfortable. I stopped explaining my boundaries like they were negotiable. And I stopped confusing endurance with virtue. One evening, a colleague asked me how I stayed so calm under pressure. I thought about Thanksgiving, about the table, about the way my voice had stayed steady when everything inside me was burning. And I answered honestly, because once you survive being stripped of dignity by people who claim to love you, I said nothing else can scare you. She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. On the anniversary of that dinner, I went out alone, not to celebrate, to acknowledge. I raised a glass to the woman I had been. The one who asked politely, who waited her turn, who thought fairness would come if she was patient enough. Then I raised another glass to the woman I had become, the one who walked away from the table, who let consequences speak, who learned that respect is not requested. It is enforced. Before I left, I checked my phone, a notification from the video platform where this story would eventually live. Comments. Thousands of them. Women saying that was me. Women saying I thought I was crazy. Women saying thank you for putting words to something I never could. I smiled. If this story reached you, if it stirred something uncomfortable or familiar, then let me say this clearly. You are not wrong for asking. You are not weak for needing help. And you are not cruel for walking away when humiliation is offered instead of support. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is not taking anything. It's finally keeping yourself. If this story resonated with you, stay. There are more like it. And none of them end with silence anymore.